A train pulls in, a spiky-haired kid jumps off the roof, kicks a guard, finds friends, and defeats his arch-nemesis as he goes on to save the world. Off the bat, this might not seem like an environmental warning masterpiece. However, there is a strong and persistent eco-friendly message in Final Fantasy VII, one that's even more important today than it was over 25 years ago. Before you complain about this script being stolen from an article online, I wrote that article. I just decided to revisit this topic after recently annoying my brother by describing the protest group Just Stop Oil as the real-world Avalanche, after he complained about that group. The article was published on GamesPew.com, an independent gaming website with lots of news, reviews and spews. Their coverage of indie games is particularly splendid. There is a link to that article and the website below. Please support independent journalism. Also support me by liking, subscribing, share, help. Please help! Since 1997, gaming has changed and the world with it, but we cannot understate the impact Squaresoft's Final Fantasy VII had on gaming. It's not my favourite in the series, but it's certainly a game that was not only brilliant in its story, but giant in its ability to be culturally relevant. Square Enix, as the company is now known, cannot hope to have anywhere near the drastic influence it once had with the series, and the last two main series games have had at best mixed receptions, even if they sold quite well. But those sales depend on the rich veins of fame brought about from Final Fantasy VII, and the remake collection is testament to that. So yes, Final Fantasy VII is as big, as popular and as important as ever. I think this has a lot to do with how the game fantastically gets you fully captivated in a feeling of abundant grand adventure. First impressions matter. If you've ever listened to the game's opening score, you'll know how it brilliantly mirrors the feeling of adventure you're about to embark on. It starts with a faint opening of mechanical ambient that is cut through by some hopeful strings as the distinctive sound of a train meters the background. These hopeful strings then take a depressive turn, the horns alluding to the state of affairs in Midgar. Then suddenly, Final Fantasy VII starts and the music becomes an excited gallop. You know you are at the start of an epic tale of a world turned sour. What's even more impressive is that this scene evokes such grandeur despite it not being visually reminiscent of grand adventures of old. Final Fantasy VII certainly wasn't the first game to set an adventure amongst a dank, smog-filled city. Even Final Fantasy had edged towards it with the 6th entry, but the overwhelming majority of media still had based RPGs amongst the lands of classic fantasy, evoking classic Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy. It's brutally effective in how we are compelled towards the goal in this opening set piece. But what is that goal, I don't hear you ask? Our goal is to carry out an environmental terrorist attack on the Shinra company, a company that is bleeding the world for use of its natural resources and the power that come with it. For a game produced in the 90s, this was a dramatic and radical opening, but Final Fantasy VII pays more than just lip service to this environmental message. Throughout the first segment of the story, you are reminded of the horrors of this dying planet and how the poorest civilians of the city are the ones paying the biggest price. Sure, Barrett's less than subtle monologues about the environmental dangers to the world may become less frequent as the story progresses, but it is a message that continues to haunt the backdrop of the story. In the remakes, we can see more of how this world has been siphoned of its energy as we explore within Midgar and outside, seeing a drastic deviation from the extensive extraction. We are reminded that the power that Shinra was tapping into is called the life force. It is the embodiment of every soul on the planet. It gives life to all creatures and every one of them returns to the life force stream when they pass away. It's a very poetic but poignant expression of how the world gives life to us and we in return must live in balance with it. But at the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, this life stream has become infected by the machinery and deeds of the evil people in charge of the world, and thus the planet is dying. It isn't hard to draw parallels between this world and our own. Final Fantasy VII is creating a clear message: we are killing our planet. That's where that spiky-haired kid comes in. Cloud has been hired by Barrett and the band of eco-terrorists known as Avalanche, and they want to stop Shinra's effort by blowing up their reactors. It's extreme, and their so-called terrorist action is even debated within the game. Should they go to such explosive measures in order to reach their aims? Arguably, such action is easily justified once you experience the comically evil characters that run Shinra, and where we see the visible black circle of death surrounding the city of Midgar. Midgar. It's easier to justify any action, no matter how extreme, if it saves the world from a plague of our own making. The sequels do dial back a tiny bit, with the explosions somewhat being premeditated by Shinra. However, I don't think it takes away from that deeply impactful analogy to our world that adds so much weight to the story, and the game wouldn't have the bite it needs at its formation without it. What I'm saying is, not only is Final Fantasy VII projecting an important message, but Final Fantasy VII is better for having that message because it needs it in order to give it the impetus it needs in the story.
Though it is as much a reservoir as it is a stream, being the sum of the planet's spiritual energy.
Now, don't get me wrong, I don't believe Square was ever actively pushing for us to explode oil rigs, and there aren't giant weapons destroying the man-made structures here on Earth. However, there's no denying we're in the midst of a real climate crisis. We're suffering from rising temperatures, widespread fires, devastating flooding, and a smorgasbord of climate-induced emergencies all over the globe. Maybe the world is fighting back, just as it does in Final Fantasy VII.